All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and this beautiful weather afternoon. Especially with this beautiful weather, I'm so appreciative of everybody joining us. Considering it's so nice outside, I really appreciate that everybody is inside watching this Zoom with us this afternoon. For those that have not met me before, I'm Elizabeth York. I am the museum's executive director. Today's lecture is sponsored by the Mid-Cape Cultural Council, as well as Massachusetts Cultural Council, as well, of course, as our 2023 corporate sponsors. Those are Cape Air, Highline Cruises, and Avangrid. A big thank you to them for their generous support of our museum and our programs. And it's really important and worth noting that programs like this lecture today are sponsored and made possible from support from folks like yourselves watching here today. I know I sound like PBS every time, but it's a great way to say it. They really did it right the first time. They said that all of this is made possible by you folks. So I really urge you to consider donating or becoming a member of our museum today. Your support really helps us host programs like these and many others. So please consider donating today. Our online donation is really easy to use and very quick to get done. So before we get started, just a few reminders of our Zoom lecture format. Please be sure to keep your microphone on mute and your video off. This helps keep all of the attention on our speaker today, and it also helps your side of things for the video feed. If you have any technical issues, please don't hesitate to send me a message via the chat function. Now, our speaker today will be taking questions at the end. If you have a question, please feel free to type that into the Q&A or the chat option. But again, our speaker will be taking questions at the end. And please feel free to type those questions in at any point. So today's lecture is presented by Joe Yukna of the Cape Cod Military Museum. The Cape Cod Military Museum is dedicated to promoting an understanding and appreciation of the contributions of Americans in the conflict of the 20th century, with an emphasis on the unique role of southeastern Massachusetts. The Cape Cod Military Museum seeks not to glorify war, but rather to honor the sacrifices of the men and women who served both at home and abroad. So, Joe, please take it away and tell us all about Cape Cod's role in World War II.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Today we're going to talk about Cape Cod, the cradle of invasion.
You're not sharing.
Not sharing?
No.
Okay. Where'd the screen share go?
Blue button. Other one.
That one?
That one.
Okay.
Hover over it. No, your picture.
This one?
The bigger one.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. That looks better. All right. Yeah. So we do the cradle of invasion, which is a lecture that concerns how Cape Cod was the birth center for the Army invasion, amphibious invasions. Our story doesn't start here on the Cape, but in Europe with a nobleman by the name of Louis, not Prince Louis, not King Louis, a little too far back. Here he is, Lord Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten was a military genius that came up with the combined arms forces concept. He came up with this patch too, which illustrates it. The eagle on the patch represents the air power, the Tommy gun, the Army, and the anchor for the Navy. The combination of these three branches into one command made amphibious operations possible. He designed a similar patch for the U.S. forces and personally presented it to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His unconventionally trained commandos were given the Axis forces fits with their hit-and-run raids years before America entered the war. When America entered World War II, the U.S. realized there would be a need for trained troops in the most difficult operation in warfare, an opposed landing on a hostile shore. In April of 1942, Mountbatten, Sir John Dill, and the U.S. generals decided that our troops should receive their initial amphibious training in the United States before heading to the ETO, European Theater of Operations. America needed a site that could host a division, was near the shore, and had excellent rail lines and had year-round amphibious capabilities. Well, Camp Edwards fit the bill except for the year-round issue. It used to be a lot colder in the wintertime when the bays and estuaries used to freeze solid. So it was the starting point. They're going to construct a base down in Florida and continue the training in the wintertime down there. Carabella, Florida was chosen as the site. Camp Edwards would host the Amphibious Training Command, the Engineer Amphibian Command, until Florida was ready. The black area in that map is Camp Edwards. And this is how Cape Cod became the cradle of invasion. The Amphibious Training Center's job was to train regular infantry divisions in amphibious tactics. When General Trudeau and his officers of the training cadre arrived at Camp Edwards, their headquarters consisted of one folding table, one folding chair, and one staff sergeant. The Engineer Amphibian Command trained specialty troops in boat handling, transportation of troops to shore, clearing the beach obstacles, supply the beach, creating beach exits, salvage, repair, medical evacuation. The EAC was commanded by Colonel, later on General Daniel Nochi. He and his staff worked 18 hours a day in June of 1942. Cape Cod, however, was no stranger to amphibious operations. In 1941, prior to the U.S. entry into World War II, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, trained at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Troops were sent by truck from Devens to Boston Harbor, where they boarded the USS Kent, amphibious transport. The Kent sailed through the Cape Cod Canal, and here she is sailing. She was painted white, and you can see the large American flag on her. Because remember, the war was going on. We were neutral, but they were German U-boats operating off our coast. And we wanted to definitely let them know that this was an American ship. So hopefully they wouldn't catch a torpedo. They sailed into Buzzards Bay, where the LCP, landing craft personnel, were lowered. The troops would scramble down the cargo nets into the bobbing craft. They would sail through Buzzards Bay and hit the beach. Does anybody recognize that beach? That house on the cliff is still there. That is Old Silver in Falmouth, Massachusetts. The date of this photograph? June 6, 1941. Exactly 3 years to the day, the same troops of the 1st Infantry Division were hitting the beaches of Bloody Omaha on D-Day. The logical question for the EAC was where to find the men to drive the boats. While it's certainly possible to train landlubbers in seamanship, it would be easier to train men that had some experience at sea to become soldiers. The Army, Navy, Merchant Marines, Coast Guard were all searching men with small boat experience. Direct commissions were offered to yacht club members who could navigate. They often joined and brought their mechanics with them. Many amphibious, if you notice in this picture, this is a machine gun training on Camp Edwards. There is a Coast Guardsman in the black uniform in the back with the Donald Duck hat. And there's a hodgepodge. Nobody's uniform matches because they all came from different branches. Funny story about the Donald Duck hat, the black cap he's wearing. They got rid of it in the 50s because if you wore your all Navy Class A uniform, they would get hit by drunk drivers, and they were drunk too. So they had them with the white Dixie cup hats. They used to, Gilligan's Island hat, so they'd show up at night. So one of the places they detoured the people to that were coming in for the amphibious training was factories, so they could learn how the engines were built, where the boats were built. And you didn't have to go there very far. These are LCMs, 50-foot all metal constructed landing craft. This is being built at the Boston Naval Shipyard. These boats were built there, then they would go be shipped by rail down to Cape Cod. Our great ally, Britain, provide experts to help train our boys in amphibious and commando tactics. The Navy demanded the word amphibious be dropped, so engineer amphibious brigades became engineer special brigades. Each ESB special brigade had 7,000 soldiers and men and 550 boats. Camp Edwards was not large enough to host interdivision amphibious engineers. Plus, they needed other training and living areas that had to be closer to the shore. This is Waquoit Bay, which was the center with Washburn Island on the left. You can see landing craft going through the opening. There's an LCT landing craft tank in the foreground. That's the large craft. Up in the middle upper, you can see these little things sticking to the water. Those are the piers. Washburn had was the center. There were 4 piers. You can see the brown lines. Those are the piers in this map. The piers were over 700 feet long. Piers 3 and 4 were mooring piers, and 1 and 2 were fueling piers. There's a variety of landing craft rafted up onto one of the piers. It was originally reached by a pontoon bridge. And a causeway, and then they built a solid bridge. If you look on the upper left, you can see the pontoon bridge and all the tents that were out there. The pine trees were rapidly cleared, and the men set up tents. They used a hodgepodge of obsolete naval craft and civilian craft originally. But it soon became a tent city. Each one of these pyramid tents had 5 soldiers in it. On the right of the photograph are the mess halls, and there were 5 of them. Seacoast Shores in Falmouth. If you've ever been, you might notice that all the roads are perfectly straight. That's because the roads were built by Army bulldozers, and they did 90-degree turns because they weren't roads for houses, they were roads for tents. If you look at the photograph on the right, there's little dots in it. Those are all pyramid tents. There were 18,000 soldiers housed in the South Cape area. They made classrooms out of the woods. Washburn wasn't large enough, so there was also a camp built in Cotuit called Camp Can Do It, play on words. You can see on this map the docking area, the pier area. One of the piers there was over 1,000 feet long. And you can see the mess halls in the center of the black rectangles. Here's that interesting dock configuration. Here are the Cape Cod commandos marching through the mess halls. Here's a duck in the Cotuit Bay. That water tower is not there anymore. Another site was the Crosby Boatyard, became Camp Had Done It. Another play on words on the Camp Can Do It. This is where all the heavy maintenance occurred on the boats and modifications made. as the Crosby Boatyard from the sea. They had floating dry docks that could hoist a couple of LCMs, which is a large metal landing craft. Third area that you can still visit were these huge boat sheds on Scranton Avenue in Falmouth. They just redid the roof and redid the siding on them. So they look better than this photograph that I have here. And they did modifications, experimental aircraft here as well. Pompanesett was a noisy place because that's where they had the anti-aircraft, anti-ship training with 50 caliber machine guns. This is where the new Seabury Golf Course is now. And this anti-aircraft, anti-boat training was very important. On December 31st, 1943, amphibious gunners manning 50 caliber machine guns on 2 LCMs were attacked by Japanese aircraft, and they were able to knock down 5 of the attacking planes. They also had boat targets there as well. The 1st Engineer Special Brigade was pulled for overseas duty in August of 42. There was a real fear that the Russians would quit the war. Remember, things weren't going well. The Germans were pushing into Egypt. The German has also pushed into Stalingrad. And Joseph Stalin was clamoring for an invasion of Europe. So the 1st ESB was sent overseas in August of 42. In fact, the whole reason the amphibious training happened on Washburn was because they thought they were going to have to do a shore-to-shore invasion from England by small boat over to France. And that's why we trained from shore-to-shore assaults originally, not ship-to-shore as the invasion actually happened. They were sent to Europe with very little water training, but luckily they had more training in Ireland and Scotland. And here's where Mountbatten stabbed the 1st Engineer Special Brigade in the back. As a Navy man, he became worried that the U.S. Army was becoming too good at amphibious operations, and he worried they'd take it over. He mentioned this to Admiral King. Admiral King relegated the 1st Engineer Special Brigade to shore duties. The 1st was used for all shore duties, including the unloading of ships. The 395th Boat Battalion did get to pilot 60 landing craft that didn't have pilots on them in the invasion of North Africa. But usual military intelligence, the best trained boatmen, all the yachtsmen, all the engineers were turned into truck drivers in North Africa. So they wasted the best seamen we had and made them into truck drivers. However, the duties of the 1st Engineer Special Brigade became so important that it actually swelled up to have 30,000 troops in it by the end of the war. The 2nd Engineer Special Brigade were the men Cape Codders referred to as the Cape Cod Commandos. They said, "We hit, but don't run." The 2nd Engineer Special Brigade liked the nickname and kept it. They would also be heard to call out to each other, "Buck up, you Cape Cod Commando," while landing on some Pacific island clear on the other side of the world. When this patch was manufactured, 342 women and girls of Falmouth boarded trucks and jeeps to go over to the bridge to Washburn Island and hand sew on patches. They spent 2,309 hours sewing on 20,000 of these patches. The 2nd Engineer Special Brigade actually cleared the land for Camp Can-Do-It. Here are some Cape Cod Commandos on the march. Now, this house is rather interesting design, and luckily it still exists, and we were able to find it. And we could match up the photographs. It's down by the Shumat bird sanctuary. And the woman who lives there was a little girl at the time, and she used to run out with well water to give the soldiers a drink when they were marching. Commanders had to learn navigation and boat handling in all weather conditions. Here's a photo of an LCM that is broached or turned sideways to the surf. This was a boatman's nightmare. Boats would often break apart and be told total losses when this happened. You had to learn how to go over a sandbar. There's a way you could coast in, cut your engine back, your wake would form a wave, and then you'd gun it and ride this wave over a sandbar. So there's all kinds of techniques that they had to learn in boat handling. A lot of the training was done at night because the generals wanted the invasion to happen at first light, so the invasion forces would have a full day's light to accomplish their mission, which meant the flotillas would have to form up in the dark. Training is dangerous. There are many losses. The landing craft were led by picket boats, 38-foot Coast Guard boats. This is the same one that was in that news article that had capsized and the crew had been lost in. Now, the picket boat had watertight compartments, so it wouldn't sink, but it didn't have a self-righting keel like the lifeboat that made the dramatic rescue with the Pendleton. So this boat was towed in upside down. When they got into Martha's Vineyard, they found one of the crewmen had gone to the engine compartment and drowned trying to restart the engine. Here's what it looked like in the water. The amphibians trained with many different boats. The first boat was the LCP, landing craft personnel. This 36-foot wooden boat was the first of the famous Higgins boats. And the reason they were made of wood was that wood was one of the few things that wasn't rationed during the war. We had plenty of trees. It could land on beaches and back out. It had a very special hull design. And Mr. Higgins was actually selling these boats prior to the war, especially in the 1920s, to rum runners. So you could drive your boat onto the shore, unload your whiskey, and then back out. The big problem with the LCP was that troops had to jump off the side because there was no ramp. So the next step was the LCPR, landing craft personnel ramp, which had a small ramp. You can see it's still very crowded and hard to get the men off of it in a hurry. And the third was the LCVP, landing craft vehicle personnel. This could carry a small vehicle like a Jeep, and the men could get off 4 abreast using that ramp. Here is a Jeep that's been brought from Washburn to Martha's Vineyard. It's an early LCVP. As you can see, there is a raised coxswain position in the back right of the boat. We talked to an officer who was at Washburn in 42, and he thought it was a stupid design because the first thing the enemy would shoot the coxswain off the boat. So the later production versions of the LCVP, the coxswain is inside the craft. The next step up was the 50-foot landing craft mechanized LCM. This is all metal. The original ones were 50 feet long, and maybe somebody at the Maritime Museum could figure it out, but there is a formula that the engineers decided if they added 6 feet to the LCM, that the 56-foot boat would be faster, handle better, and obviously could carry more cargo. It's a ratio, I guess, from water line to engine power or something like that. But the 56-foot LCM, which the ones we saw in the photograph at the Boston shipyard, were the model that was produced. Now, an LCM was big enough to carry a Sherman tank. The next step up was the landing craft tank, LCT. Now, this was 95 foot long, and the Navy would not give up control of it, so it was always piloted by Navy personnel. However, it was in the amphibious table of operations. All training was a military secret. Passengers were required to drive on post road to be near the water in Katuitt. Civilians could not go near Washburn. No civilian boats were allowed out at night, and you had to have a license to sail your boat in the waters around Cape Cod. Amphibious vehicles were also evaluated and tested here. One of the greatest innovations was the U.S. Amphibious Forces was the use of amphibious truck, better known as a duck because its technical initials, DUKW. The D stands for the year, 1942. U stands for the body type, utility. K stands for all-wheel drive, and W stands for dual rear axles. The duck underwent its scientific evaluation here in Cape Cod, specifically in Provincetown. Here's one in the dunes in Provincetown. I don't know if I'd like to be the test driver that took this down that cliff. But one of the reasons that Provincetown was chosen as the test evaluation site for the duck was that the topography and the sand type is very similar to what's in Normandy. One of the innovations that they came up was the bow plane. If you notice, there's a metal sheet metal in front of this duck, because the original ducks, if they hit a big wave or came down a steep embankment, would submarine and submerge into the water. They increased the bilge pump ability, and they came up with this bow plane to help the boat from submarining through waves. And this is on Nantucket Sound. Here's a bunch leaving South Cape Beach in Mashpee. 32 ducks a day came in by rail in 1942 and 1943. The landing vehicle track, LVT, was also evaluated here. And these amphibious tractors could swim using their tracks as propulsion through water and climb over obstacles and through mud, etc. One of the complaints, however, was that the LVTs would stir up the mud so much the oyster beds in Osterville Harbor was silted over. The M29 Weasel could go anywhere through mud, sand, water. There were a couple of these launched at D-Day, but they overloaded them at Omaha Beach, and they sank in the high waves. The Seep was seagoing Peep, because Jeeps were originally called Peeps, and then they were changed to Jeep after a character in a Popeye film that could go anywhere. So the seagoing Peep was also tested and evaluated at Camp Edwards. Here is the Aqua Cheetah. Not every vehicle was a success. You've probably never heard of the Aqua Cheetah for good reason. It was had terrible freeboard, and it was unseaworthy. It took a couple of drowned engineers before they dropped its project. One of the greatest innovations in amphibious operations was also one of the smallest. The amphibious engineers wanted to impress the military brass with how seaworthy the landing craft were. So they went out on a particular stormy day and surprised the generals with a landing. Well, the boats made it to shore. However, the men were combat ineffective and basically fell onto the sand puking. So doctors at Camp Edwards came up with the seasick pill. So you've taken Dramamine on a cruise, you can thank the amphibious engineers, because that's who invented the seasick pill. The amphibians did intense training. Here they are, they're swimming with helmet, boots, and 60 pounds of equipment on, treading water. They were in unbelievable shape. Here they jumped ashore from that land LCM in the distance, swam to shore, and are ready to fight. They were trained in demolition, hand-to-hand combat, bayonet training. They had a commando reaction course with a bunch, it's like sort of a haunted house. You do turn corners and you had all kinds of scenarios with pop-up dummies and dummies that would swing down at you. And one of the dummies had a bladder filled with pig's blood. So when you bayoneted it, it would squirt blood on the soldier. They had learned to fire from the hip, clear barbed wire. There were three 48-foot tall cargo net towers for training. If you look in the background on the right, you can see the bow of a mock landing craft that I think they could rock back and forth on logs to make it move as you climb down and into it. The culmination of training was a 100-yard mud crawl, and this involved explosions going off, and there were 6 30 caliber machine guns firing live rounds 30 inches off the ground. You see where that wire is, the little line going across the photograph? If that soldier's head came up any higher than that wire, he could get killed. The writings about this course brag that nobody had been killed on it, which means people were shot on it. And one common enemy that they would encounter was poison ivy, especially up near Camp Canduit. While recovering, they could listen into the Amphibious Command's band. There were several of them, including a jazz band called the Amphibians. There were slot machines in the Camp Canduit's barracks, and of course there were poker and crap games everywhere. They would put on shows. One show was so popular they had to keep redoing it whenever any visiting brass came. It was called the Seahorse Scandals. The National Archives asked for a copy of it, so you can go down to the archives and read how the play went. Because remember, they didn't have TV and radio, so it kind of was like the old times. They talk about, Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Let's put on a show. That was a big thing to do, actually entertain themselves. The Amphibious Training Command welcomed the 45th Division to the Cape. The 45th was a National Guard unit from Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. The shoulder patch was a swastika, an American Indian symbol for good luck. They changed it in '39. The more famous Thunderbirds. There was a shortage of boats, so a lot of training was conducted with mock wooden boats. Here's some 45th soldiers in a wooden mock-up boat. The entire 45th Division was rotated through Camp Edwards for their amphibious training. The other half stayed at Fort Devens. There were a lot of Native Americans in the 45th. Cape Codders were fascinated by these warriors from the West. And the Indians were very happy to be in New England because they were not allowed to drink in their home states in a saloon. The Native Americans put on a display of dance at Fort Devens, and this was witnessed by Fort Devens radio morning personality D.V. Edwards. D.V. for Fort Devens, Edwards for Camp Edwards was her stage name. And she asked the dancers if they would come on her show and talk about their performance. Well, they would have to get up at 3 a.m. to be at her, because it wasn't highways back in the day, 3 a.m. to get to her show, which started at 5:30 in the morning. And all of them said no to her request to be on her radio show, except for one. He was very large, taciturn. He had a knife fighting scar on his face, and he showed up. So Devi goes to him, well, what should we call you? And he said, call me Soldier. Where are you from? I am from far away. Finally, the very flustered Devi Edwards asked him, well, what does the Native American dancing mean to you? And he said, well, much like Shakespeare is the English language, the Native American dancing symbolizes our entire culture. He was the most educated man in the division, and he was just playing with her. The most famous member of the 45th Division was armed with a pen, not a rifle. This is Bill Maudlin. Here is a cartoon he did about amphibious landing. And you know he went through amphibious landing because of the hand placement of Willie and Joe in this cartoon. When you climb down a cargo net, your instinct would be to grab the horizontal ropes. However, the person coming down the net above you would step on your hand. So hands were always to grab the vertical lines of the cargo net, and your feet were to go on the horizontal ropes. Here's his most famous cartoon. He sold comic strips to the Boston Herald while he was at Camp Edwards. The training of the 45th and 2nd Engineer Special Brigade culminated with an invasion of Martha's Vineyard. The boats would leave Cape Cod and land on the infantry on the shores of Martha's Vineyard at sunrise. The invasion was even to have paratroopers capture the airport. Elements of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment arrived a few days before the planned invasion. Paratroopers had to go through hellish training and survive 5 practice jumps in order to get their wings. Once they had their wings, they could blouse their pants into their jump boots to symbolize their elite status in the military. Herein lies a problem. The amphibious engineers, as noted earlier, go through their own hellish training. They wore jump boots because they were waterproof, and they would blouse their pants into their boots. So a large number of paratroopers were walking down Buzzards Bay, Main Street Buzzards Bay, encountered a large group of engineer amphibians. Noticed they were wearing bloused jump boots. Also noticed they weren't wearing jump wings, and decided to take the jump boots off of the engineers because they didn't deserve to wear them. The engineer amphibians demurred, and there was a huge brawl, so large the state police and the border police just blocked off Main Street and called for the MPs to come out at the base. 6 of the MPs were injured, breaking up the fight. So the first battle that the engineer amphibians and the paratroopers of America were in World War II was over jump boots in Buzzards Bay. The invasion lasted a few days. It worked really well. They called it off a day early. Here it is. It was completely military secret, so of course Martha's Vineyard people were out with signs welcoming the troops to the invasion. The engineer amphibians had captured the airport by the time the paratroopers were to jump on it. Probably a payback for the Battle of the Boots a few days earlier. The 45th Division was shipped overseas and soon used their training conducting landings in Sicily, Italy, and southern France. The next division to arrive was the 36th Texas Division. Cape Codders and these tough hombres hit it off, even though the Texans complained about the lack of spices in the New England diet. The Texans liked to fight so much that the record, "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You," had to be pulled from the local jukeboxes. The Texans would play the song and insist that everyone in uniform stand at attention. If the request was refused, the refuser was forced to stand or a fight would break out. When we do this in person, we usually sing this song, but if I have no support, you don't want to hear me sing. But it's sung to the tune of "I've Been Working on the Railroad." So, "The eyes of Texas are upon you, all the livelong day," etc., etc., etc. There was a ranger school set up in Falmouth near Woods Hole. On September 10th and 3rd, the ESB conducted a huge parade. 1,000 boats paraded through the Cape Cod Canal. The co-founder of the Military Museum, Jerry Ellis, was a child at the time. He remembers the noise and the diesel fumes was amazing. This is not a picture of this. This is when the 1st Engineer Special Brigade, the 1st Infantry Division was training, because by that time, the canal was guarded during the war, and you couldn't take photographs of anything going on in the canal. Although Jerry used to sneak down all the time and avoid the Coast Guardsmen that were guarding it. So this is a photograph of the 1st Engineer. You can see the white boats and the LCPs and whaler boats, stuff like that. The 36th training culminated with a 3-day second invasion of Martha's Vineyard by the 3rd Engineer Special Brigade and the 36th Texas Infantry Division. They invaded Nantucket too. This was a full division with all attached units, including tanks and the new M10 tank destroyer. Boats left from Waquoit Bay, Waquoit Bay, Dennis. LSTs embarked from New Bedford. A large group of generals and admirals were waiting in the pre-dawn dark to observe the landing training exercise. Near the appointed time, a lone boat looking lost pulls up, and the coxswain yells out, "Is this Red Beach?" The admirals and generals smirked at each other, thinking, "Oh boy, another training screw-up." Suddenly, out of the gloom, in perfect formation, comes a wave of landing craft. One of the many modifications suggested by the engineer amphibians was to put the landing craft exhaust below the waterline. This muffled the sound of the boats. So the new quieter boats heading into the wind carried the sound away. The lost boat was actually from the opposing forces that was there to set off charges for realism. Here's a color photo of the landing exercise. Here they're putting matting down so vehicles wouldn't get bogged down in the sand. Here is another picture of the landing. And notice the barrage balloons. One of the mysteries of the barrage balloons was what unit was actually manning them. These would prevent low-flying aircraft from coming down and strafing the beaches and the ships at sea. In D-Day, there was an African-American unit, the 320th. We're not sure if the African-American units doing the barrage balloons in 1942 for the Amphibious Engineer Command. However, there's no mention of who did the balloons, which unfortunately, with the prejudice of the time, leads us to believe that they could very well have been African Americans serving on Washburn Island at the time. 2 of the officers died in the Coconut Grove fire before the 36th Infantry Division was sent overseas. In the fall, the 36th went on to land in Italy and southern France. The amphibians and most of the boats went by rail to Florida and then Camp Gordon Johnson, because that was set up by this time for the winter. In the spring, they came back, however, 38 landing craft sailed the 2,170 miles to Carabella, Florida, and they sailed back, returning in the spring. Here's the soldiers taking the train south. And here is one of the boats that sailed up back from Carabella down in Florida. This was the mess hall boat. It has a covered area for dining and food supplies. It also has a toilet facility on the back, which is an outhouse because these boats were not designed for long trips at sea. So they do not have a toilet facility on them. The Cape Cod Commandos trained Ranger battalions. The 2nd ESB had split by this time to form the 3rd. Replacements brought the units up to full strength. The Amphibious would motor the Rangers up to Martha's Vineyard. The Rangers would then scale the cliffs at Gay Head. A few years later, these same Rangers would famously scale the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, Normandy. And you see the American flag? That's not a disrespect to the American flag. The Rudder's Rangers that took Pointe du Hoc, and an amazing feat of military daring do, their radio equipment was damaged by the high surf, and the U.S. forces didn't know they had completed their mission, and some American planes were preparing to strafe them. One of the soldiers had an American flag, and he laid it on the ground so the pilots could see that they were Americans. MacArthur wanted the amphibious engineers to do their job, which is to land troops in the Pacific theater of operations. The problem was the 36-foot landing craft couldn't fit through any of the hatches of the ships, and the tops of the ships, all storage was reserved for aircraft, because again, remember in 42 things weren't going well, and they needed every aircraft they could possibly get to fight the Japanese advances. So one of the generals came up with an idea that if they sent the landing craft in pieces, they could be reassembled in Australia. So the men who were at the 411th Heavy Boat Repair Battalion that were at Falmouth at Scranton Avenue spent 2 weeks working on the assembly line down in Louisiana at the Higgins Boatyard. They then went to Florida, built their own factory where they assembled thousands of landing craft, 300 a month, that were used in the Pacific theater of operations. Another reason to justly call Cape Cod the cradle of invasion. By the time the Cape Cod Commandos landing in the Philippines, it was a 75th combat landing. A Cape Cod Commando had brought Douglas MacArthur to the Philippines in LCM. And if you look at this photograph, the soldiers and generals around him all appear to be very anxious. And Mr. MacArthur, General MacArthur, looks very angry. He wanted the boat to come in and drop him off on dry land. Well, the Cape Cod Commando said, no, drop the ramp and you wade in like everybody else. Now, Douglas, when he saw how dramatic this photograph looked of him wading to shore, on every subsequent landing, made sure that the ramp was dropped off in the water so he would wade ashore. He knew how to use his publicity. The 2nd Engineer Special Brigade received the Presidential Unit Citation. When the amphibians left in 43, that was it for amphibious training on the Cape. The hurricane of 44 caused extensive damage to the Cape. Many trees were knocked down. Some of the 5,000 German POWs from Rommel's Africa Corps that were housed at Camp Edwards and all over the Cape were used to clear the timber. They set up 6 sawmills on the base. So the POWs would go out, collect lumber and trees from people's yards. The people were paid for the lumber they took off their yard. And of course, the German prisoners were paid to turn it into board lumber. They made 7 million yards of board lumber. Washburn wasn't quite done, however. In 44 and 45, Camp Edwards became one of the largest rehabilitation hospitals in America, convalescent rehabilitation hospitals. This tube right here is actually a fire escape, because if you had men with no legs on the second floor, they couldn't escape. You may be able to carry 1 and 2 down before you were exhausted. So they had orderlies that would sleep, and you would fire the injured, recovering men through the chute if you had a fire. And these were all coal-fired buildings, so fire was a real possibility. But Washburn was decided to be turned into a R&R recreational facility. 800 troops were bussed over during the day. At noon, another 800 were bussed over, so they could learn to swim. And let's face it, if you were missing a leg or an arm, and you were the only person on the beach that had that condition, you'd feel odd. If you're one of 800 other wounded men, you wouldn't think anything of it. So they had all kinds of recreation activities. The Waquoit Yacht Club that held dances for the injured soldiers, and local girls would dance with the men learning how to dance, missing a leg or an arm, etc. So Washburn is one of the few places in the world that train men for war and then help them heal afterwards. The construction photographs were donated by Judy and Phil Sobrano. If you like this talk, I'm doing another talk. Oh, this poem was made up at Washburn by an unknown soldier. The infantry got worried when the water looked so wet. The Navy marched half a mile and cannot stand up yet. Marines are in the movies, and now the little dears can all go home and leave it to the amphibian engineers. But I'm doing another talk on Waquoit War, which actually deals with Joe Louis coming to the island, General Patton coming to the island, the interaction that people had with the troops. One of the funny things was coffee was rationed for the general public, but not for the Army. And the Cape Cod Commandos, they made them eat rations, and they had freeze-dried coffee foil packets in it. But the guys knew they could get real coffee somewhere else on the island, so they'd toss the foil packets of coffee away, and kids would come along and pick up the foil packets and could trade it in for favors from their mothers who were dying for coffee. So that's one of the little stories and some big stories that we talk about. And that's going to be Saturday the 20th at 3 p.m. at the Waquoit Congregational Church. All right. Questions? Anybody got questions?
We've got a few questions in the chat, Joe.
Okay.
I also want to say, before we start the questions, can you let us know, you have an amazing newsletter and an amazing social media presence. Can you please let us know how to find you guys on social media and how to sign up for the newsletter?
Yeah, our Facebook page is very active. Every day I post a 80-year-old event to the day. So whatever happened on May 7th, 1943 was posted today. Then I look for a local story, something we got in our files that I post. There's 2 World War II postings every day on our Facebook page. The newsletter is there, and you go to my website. Website's pretty static, but you can sign up for our newsletter once a month. We do a newsletter, and we try to inform some of the stuff we're doing. We don't have a building yet. We are looking for a building. We just missed out on getting into the basement JFK building. There was a snafu with that, but we're still looking for a place of our own. But we're still active. We do these lectures. We help other museums with the World War II displays. So yeah, the Facebook page, you can get a lot of information from us there.
All right. So the first question we have is from Frank. He says, are these pictures available through the museum?
He can contact me directly with any picture he's interested in. I believe information is there for sharing, but they're not like an album or something somewhere, no. But I have them all on my computer, and I'm willing to share anything he's interested in.
Wonderful. Another question from Frank. Are there memorials or remnants of the training facilities at Washburn Island?
No, but we actually have a landing craft, the Vietnam era one, that we want to turn into a memorial because it looks the same. It has the same ramp in the front. The bow is curved, not angular. I mean, the stern is curved, but it's fiberglass, but it looks exactly like the 36-footers. So we're hoping to get that turned into a memorial. Dave Rivera is helping us out with that. But yeah, we definitely wanted, because people have no idea, because a lot of it was secret. So even the locals didn't know what was going on out there because they weren't allowed, you know?
So that kind of segues into a question I had. What I found really interesting was the effect that this training had on the sort of the locals and then the local economy. I was especially curious when you mentioned that the oyster farmers were complaining that their oyster beds got silted in. And, you know, it's one of those things that you think about of, oh, yeah, of course, you know, of course. Was there any sort of fallout from any other local economies, especially on the islands? Like any, or did it bring more tourism or economy?
Well, you had a lot of soldiers spending their pay in local business, so it definitely would have been a boom town. Well, prostitution.
Bars and saloons.
Prostitution, unfortunately, was a boom town. If you're in that industry, so yeah, bars, places used to stay open late, like 3 o'clock in the morning was like last call, and there was no Mothers Against Drunk Driving, so that was not. The newspaper is full of the Cape Cod News, soldiers dying on the way back to base, you know, getting in car accidents and stuff like that. You certainly, you know, you could sell, clothing, uniforms to, you could rent out a room. So there were definitely be some economic changes that had to be made, but there definitely was a boomtown mentality when you have hundreds of thousands of troops there, you know, with nowhere else to go, you know.
Right. Spending their money, buying things, buying food and drink, etc. We have a question from Mark. He says, where did you find the pictures of Washburn Island? Are more available? I've been looking for them for years and have been all over the island since 1965.
Yeah, contact me, Joe Yukna at gmail.com. And again, I'm willing to share. We got those construction photographs donated when I did this presentation at the Webner Center at the Waquoit Estuary Reserve. They came in with it because they had it and they were looking someplace for it to go, and they saw that we had a sign up on the road that we were doing a World War II talk, and they brought it in. That's where we got those construction photographs.
Fascinating. I have a question for you. The duck boat that you guys have outside in the Bourne Historical Society, is that part of your collection?
That is part of our collection. It's going to be taken in and hopefully renovated. There's been a change in leadership at the Bourne Historical Society, so that they don't want that there anymore. So Jerry Ellis, his son, is a heavy equipment operator, so he's going to try to move that off for us. We may be doing a display at the Bourne Historical Society on Camp Edwards in World War II, but we haven't got the finalized plans. Like I said, they're in transition with the leadership there. But they've been great to us over the years. They've housed our collection in their basement for years. So, but there has been a change in leadership there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful duck boat. Considering
In
it's outdoors,
1942, it actually saved people's lives during Hurricane Carol.
Oh,
Because there were the tidal surge, and that one came up so high, there were neighborhoods that were cut off by water, and it could obviously drive the neighborhood, pick people up and drive in the water, and so that actual boat saved people in 52.
it's in great shape. It's in really great shape. All right. Do we have any other questions in the chat at the moment? Let me have a look. We've got lots of people saying thank you, amazing information, couple likes, love that. Wonderful. So Joe, do you have anything else coming down the line besides the Waquoit at War talk? Do you have any other talks coming up?
I have another talk on the 31st, Animals of World War I.
Oh, adorable.
Which is really interesting. All the draft horses were taken to be used in the war. So the elephants of both the German zoos and British zoos were turned into pull plows.
Wow.
And were used for draft animals in World War II.
Wow.
Everybody, you remember, the horses were being used in World War I. Of course, 7 million got killed. But they were pigeons, because communication wasn't, radio was not a very reliable means of communication. So pigeons were used, dogs were used, they were mascots. So it's very interesting. It's not for little kids because obviously there's death involved, but
animal death. Yeah.
It is Animals of World War I. There's a baboon that was given a military pension. That's very interesting.
Wow.
So yeah, it's fun, and we have a mascot, Sergeant Stubby, which is my dog, and he will be doing. He's named after Sergeant Stubby of World War I fame, the Yankee Division's mascot. There's an animated movie about his life, Sergeant Stubby, but he's going to do a trick demonstration at the end of that lecture.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's fabulous. And
he
when
just learned how to. He can sit pretty and salute. That's his new trick.
Love
Which
that.
the original side. Well, here's the story of why that's an important trick to learn. The Yankee Division was drilling at in New Haven, and this dog joined the 102nd Infantry Regiment, and he'd march with the soldiers, and they taught him all kinds of tricks. And when they were put on ship, they were told that all pets had to be left at home, or if they were found, then they'd be killed. So they snuck Stubby on board, and he was discovered by the commanding officer of the 102nd Infantry Regiment. But Stubby knew to sit pretty and salute officers, so he sat pretty and saluted the general, and the general saluted back and said, "Well, I guess he can stay." So it was amazing. He saved a girl's life in Paris on leave. A little girl from getting hit by a car. He alerted them to gas attacks. He'd kill rats. He caught a German spy by himself, and that's actually when he was promoted to sergeant. His owner was a corporal, so he actually outranked his owner. He's the only dog to be given official rank in the military. But he was wounded 3 times. He was gassed. He was hit by a grenade from a Stormtrooper. Stormtrooper is not from Star Wars, but it's actually from the Germans in World War I. And he was gassed. He was hit by artillery fragments and a grenade. But he's got 3 Purple Hearts. It's an amazing dog. So he's an integral part of this lecture.
He certainly earned his rank there. He certainly earned.
Yeah,
it,
the kids might watch. I don't know if you ever show films here, but that might be something the kids would like.
That's a great idea.
There is an animated Gerard Dupadeau plays the Poulet, which is the French.
Mm.
Helen Bonham Carter is the girlfriend. I forget who the guy who plays his owner is, but it's not Disney because there is death, but it's not. It didn't do well in the theaters because it was hard to market, but it
Mm.
actually is a very good movie. And Pixar wouldn't let Amazon sell copies of it
Okay.
because they didn't want in the competition.
Ah, I see.
Interesting.
Mm.
Yeah. So, but it is a good movie.
And when and where is that talk?
That is going to be May 31st. So Wednesday, 7 p.m.
Mhm.
at the Museum of Natural History. It's for the Mass Archaeological Society, but it's at the Museum of Natural History.
Wonderful. All right, folks. I think that's it, Joe. We don't have any other questions in the chat right now. I think
All right.
that is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, folks, this wraps up our lecture series for the year. We do have a few more events at the museum coming up. We have tomorrow is actually our second free Monday in May for the Cape Cod Museum Trail. And we're going to be focusing tomorrow on shorebirds. So if you want to join us, we're going to be doing a shorebird craft. It's family friendly. We also have a few other events coming up May 13th. That's Saturday. It's next Saturday. We're going to be doing a beachcombing walk with Gil Newton of the Cape Cod Community College, if you know him. We're going to be walking up and down Calmus Beach, looking to see what plants and animals we can find. Please feel free to join us. You can sign up online. And then, of course, and most excitingly, May 20th, so a couple Saturdays from now, is going to be our annual rowing rendezvous. So if you've ever wanted to try out rowing a small craft, a vessel, a 4-seat, 2-seat, please join us. We're going to be rowing out of Calmus Beach on the Lewis Bay side. Please join us. We're going to be out there. It's free. It's going to be tons of fun and lots of activity going on this month too. So please feel free to check out our website, and of course, feel free to sign up for our newsletter and you'll get all of the upcoming information about what we're doing. Again, Joe, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
No problem. You guys have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye, everybody.